Welcome to the Fit Dads podcast. I'm Brad Thompson. I'm joined, as always, by Ryan Dutton, and today we're joined by an actual doctor, Ryan. We've got Dr. Lee Bell. Lee today is going to talk to us about his life in training, his academic work, overtraining, ethics of studies, all the fun stuff that we've just had a little brief on right now, because I appreciate this discussion can go numerous different ways. But Lee, say hello, introduce yourself.
Hi guys, thanks for inviting me on.
All good.
So I'm a senior lecturer in sport and exercise science at Sheffield Hallam University. Been there for about 8 years now, but my journey into academia has been quite winding, quite long. Been in the industry best part of probably 20 years now, I would imagine. Worked as a personal trainer, worked as a strength and conditioning coach. I've had some quite strange jobs. I once worked for a couple of years as a website writer, so my job was to sit at home, usually in pyjamas, writing articles about fitness, and then I either selling them to websites or taking commissions from websites on specific topics. So that was pretty cool. But I think from my perspective, I've always been interested more in the education side of coaching as opposed to like the practical element of it. So I always knew I'd end up in education in some way or another. So, working as a personal trainer, tutor, assessor, kind of led me into academia, and that's how I've arrived there.
I feel like I need to start with a thank you, Lee, as well, because you qualified me for my level 2 gym instructor.
I did, mate, some time back.
Back in the day, yeah. At Norton College. And I just remember just a bit of advice that you said, and it would just always sit on the edge of your seat, just listen, pay attention, be curious, and it stuck with me, mate, so... Yeah,
so I think you were on my level at Envisage, weren't you? You were
I was.
on my level 3. So he's had a role in all our kind of success and everything we do today. So yeah, massive thank you.
Thank you, guys. I'm happy to leave it there. That's all I've come for.
To wrap up, yeah. There's the smoke being blown. Let's go for it.
And before we came on, we have to be Dr. Lee Bell, not Mr. Lee Bell today.
I mean, Lee, I know a big discussion point for you in terms of your work, and a big passion of yours is the overtraining side, and it's a big passion of mine as well, because I regularly see burnt out gym goers coming in not really spotting the signs of overtraining. What do people need to know about overtraining?
Probably in my eyes the best place to start here would be 17th century Dutch philosophy.
Didn't expect that.
Right.
This is going deep and very far back.
Well, let's set the tone straight away. No, so the reason why I want to start there is there's a philosopher, Baruch Spinoza, wrote a book called Ethics, 17th century, and in that he talks about existence. And existence is like one of the oldest ontological questions, like, do we exist? Are we real? Are we solipsistic? Are we plugged into a matrix? And he talks about how in order to talk about whether something exists, it needs structure. And for structure, it needs definitions. So one of the issues that we have with overtraining, before we can even talk about, does it exist? Is it mythological, which is a common question. You type in overtraining on Google and it's often, myths around overtraining. It needs to be appropriately defined, and that can be quite complex. The majority of my work in overtraining is actually trying to figure out what it means before we can say, can we define or determine what it is. So firstly, we could look at overtraining as a verb, this process word, this act of doing. If you look at some of the consensus literature, overtraining is talked about as either a good thing or a bad thing. So we would undertake training that's above the habitual level and inherently is challenging. So as a process, that might be something that we do intentionally, an intentional decision, a purposeful decision to say, actually, I've got a bit of a window or an opportunity. I might be off season, if I'm involved in sport, or I've got a holiday coming up and I'm just going to really hit the gym. So we're training above the habitual level. And it could also be accidental as well. We're not recovering well between sessions for whatever reason, but we're still trying to hit the same numbers in the gym. And we're hitting those same numbers in the gym, but things are just feeling harder. It's becoming more of a grind. It's very psychophysiological in nature. But in that consensus literature, it talks about how the outcome could be positive or negative. And we don't often talk about overtraining as being a positive thing. Very rarely in the literature, very rarely on the websites, very rarely in conversations with trainers and with athletes and with clients. But it could be that when we have finished that bout, that cycle of overtraining, and we recover using whatever methodologies, that we see this improvement. In the literature, they refer to that as super compensation, but in simple terms, just like an improvement above baseline. But it might well be that we've over-egged it, we've overshot, we've impaired recovery, and it takes that long to recover back to baseline that we've lost all the kind of adaptations that we work for. So it's bi-directional. So already it's like, oh, okay, there's two different things that are happening there. But we've talked about this process, this verb, but the noun, the outcome, well, that's something that's even more complex. So that's where we might potentially end up with the overtraining syndrome. So this is this complex, multifaceted medical disorder, and it's a medical disorder because it needs to be diagnosed by a clinician. The definition around that, like the key point around it, is that we've got to see a decrease in performance lasting 4 weeks or longer for us to even consider the overtraining syndrome as an outcome. So if we all go in the gym now and we absolutely smash it, but we recover within 2 weeks, we haven't got the overtraining syndrome. It's just an artifact of the normal training process. We know that this interaction between the adaptive process and fatigue is quite clear. When you train hard, you're going to become tired. But when you recover, you're hopefully seeing an improvement in performance over time. But if we overshoot it and we see this performance decrease for 4 weeks or longer, that's then when we can go with our clinician and say, actually, we need to look through what would be a diagnostic flowchart, quite a complex flowchart, to see if our athlete or our client has the overtraining syndrome. In the literature, it's never been observed. And the reason why it's not being observed is because there are no studies that have done 4-week follow-ups. So already in the literature, there are issues where, you see like prevalence statistics, 60% of athletes across their career will suffer from the overtraining syndrome, 25 per season, 90% reoccurrence rate. All these statistics are often thrown around as like a defensive point for his existence. But a lot of that is based around poor methods. So often, and there are some studies that have done this over phone call. So like, have you got the OTS? What's your performance like? It's tanked. Oh, you must have got the OTS then. But are there any other medical disorders of that severity that would be diagnosed via a phone call? No, not all. A lot of the prevalence statistics come from surveys. Do you think that you had the overtraining syndrome? Yes, you did. Okay, let's put that down as a yes. So the diagnostic profile is this set thing, but the science hasn't followed it. And then all of a sudden we wonder why there's debates about whether it exists or not. And it's because it's not. It's appropriately defined, but the definitions are not communicated outwards. So that's not an issue with those receiving the communication. To me, that's an issue with those that are developing the communications. A lot of my work looked at, so before my work, a lot of the statistics came from endurance sports, like long distance running, swimming, cycling, randomly one in motocross. Can't find the individual study, and there were also one in golf. Like, if you've got the overtraining syndrome from playing golf, I think physical activity is perhaps not for you.
I don't know, actually, because it's like running. It's very, very, very repetitive, and the same muscles, same swing, same movement pattern thousands of times. And I can see why maybe in pro athletes it might be more of a case, because they're competing, they're playing every week, 3, 4, 5 times a week, including obviously practice. But I think for your average person, like who plays once, twice a week, overtraining and golf, it probably isn't a concern.
And that's a really interesting kind of additional discussion for me. And you mentioned burnout right at the beginning as well, is these like synonym terms that we talk about. So, overtraining and burnout being the same thing. I'm trying to think of other synonyms off the top of my head. Reduction in like performance strategies or exercise selection,
just
or
fatigue,
competition techniques, fatigue, paradoxical deconditioning syndrome, underperformance, like all these other terms that have been used in and outside of the published science, that we just go, well, that all means the overtraining syndrome. But in the diagnostic template, there are things that are ruled out and not just ruled in. So there are things like non-training related stressors that we might need to rule out. So like dieting, for example. Now, again, if you look at the prevalence statistics, and we did some work on this in strength athletes, how many of you have suffered a temporary, so regardless of the time that it lasted, a temporary unexplained reduction in performance? It was like 70%. It's quite a lot. That doesn't surprise me. Then you look at actually how long did it take you to recover? Most recovered within a couple of weeks. So at face value, we might say they were overtrained, they had the OTS, but they didn't. Again, just part of normal training. Take it on the chin that if you're training hard at some point, you will be fatigued. It's part of it. But then we said, well, for those that were likely to have longer reductions in performance, what other factors were involved? And it was the typical, like, I was dieting, I had life stressors, so like busy hours at work, I've got a lot on with the family, I've got financial worries, things like that. Stress is stress. It takes its toll eventually. Now, you can't always avoid that. And I think sometimes it can be quite reductionist. Just go, well, you just need to manage your stress. It's not as simple as that. It's a physiological response to something that oftentimes is out of your control. So it is a bit reductionist to kind of go, well, if you reduce non-training stressors, we can commit to training more. Yeah, we can, but it's not always doable. So what we often need to think about is if we have a client that we're working with that's going through a lot of stress, it's perhaps a nice time to do short-term intense training because it's quite cathartic, but long-term intense training is perhaps not the best option there because it will take its toll and it will accelerate long-term performance decreases.
You mentioned a book before we started recording, which is it Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers?
Yeah.
And you mentioned a word in there, and I'm probably going to butcher this now. Is it allostasis?
Allostasis,
yeah. Is that, I've always referred to it as allostatic load. That's sort of essentially how full is your plate when it comes to training stress, diet stress, life stress. If someone's, for example, heard me throw that term out before, could you summarise that in a...
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I said a minute ago, like stress is stress. Now, we receive stresses in lots of different directions. Some are somatic, so some are physiological. So, reduction in sleep, dietary stress, training stress. Some are psychosomatic, so worrying about things that haven't occurred yet and may never occur. And that's quite a complex human reaction. No other animals stress about things that are not likely to occur. They stress about things that are occurring right there and then. So allostasis is about, well, if we take like a bucket, for example, and we can fill that bucket with different stressors, and once it overflows, we start to see bad things happen. If we start to fill that bucket with a little bit of, work-related stress and family stress and financial stress, we've only got a little bit of that bucket to fill with training stress before it breaks, before it overflows. If we can reduce and moderate stressors, we can put more training stress in there. So good coaches realise that, life periodizes, that the human is quite a complex person. And a lot of the research that comes in elite sport, okay, they've got competition stressors and they've got, lots of different goals and targets, but they haven't necessarily got work and they haven't got to train around family commitments. It's sleep, it's Xbox, it's train. All my meals are prepared for me. I've got a psychologist and I can commit really hard to training. For the person on the street, they haven't got that luxury. So it's about managing expectations. So if I've got, working with students a lot, obviously, if they've got a competition schedule and a 2-hour block where they've got exams, that's not the time where I'm going, let's just ramp up volume. Let's just see what you've got in you, because that's risky. Some might react positively, but most of them, that's going to be too much. So it's about then saying, well, actually, that's probably a good time to just reactively deload. Like, let's just decompress, do what we need to maintain, get the exams out of the way, and then let's just hit the gym again and start to build some adaptations. So that could be one route that we might navigate or avoid overtraining.
I think that really good coaches get that and understand that, but I actually think it's a skill that a lot of coaches develop over time with working with plenty of people. You just see their recovery times coming down and their passion and motivation to get to the gym start to decrease a little bit. And I think we've probably all been guilty of it in the early days, where you just come on, no pain, no gain, and just this kind of very, very Coleman style approach to just get it done no matter what. And I think, just mentioning that, I think, a lot of people's idea of overtraining and knowledge of overtraining comes from social media and these elite athletes who are just a little bit David Goggins meme is being thrown out around a lot at the moment, where it's just just do it. There was one, was it one you sent me the other day where there's a guy on a sofa and he goes, right, I'm just going to have a really nice recovery day. Goes on Instagram, it's Goggins, how bad do you want it, motherfucker? And then all of a sudden you're thinking, shit, yeah, no, I better go and do something. And then you're just bombarded with other people doing things and not taking as much rest, and you just undervalue it in yourself. And I think also, I've also mentioned this as well, if you're a coach that does certain sports and competes yourself, we're sometimes guilty of giving out the right advice but not taking it ourselves. And I'm hands up the worst for that. I can see it happening to other people and go, right, we need a deload week, we need a week just off everything if need be. But when it comes to me, I'm shocking at taking that advice. I'm no, fuck it, just push through. But
then I also think Ryan's quite good at what you call a reactional deload, which I've never heard that term before.
Okay.
In terms of life periodizers. So if Ryan gets 2 burnt out, should we say.
Yeah.
I feel like you're very good at saying, right, I'm out for a bit.
Yeah.
How do you think, Lee, someone can maybe develop that skill of knowing when to actually deload? Is it just looking at big events coming up, or?
Yeah, it is. But I think it's about understanding the delicate balance between how hard we need to train to adapt, to improve, and how quickly we lose those adaptations. And a lot of people think that we lose fitness very, very quickly. We actually don't, particularly like physical things like muscle hypertrophy or strength. The thing with a reactive deload is if we catch it early, we're perhaps only going to miss a few days of training, or it might be a light day in the gym. If we keep going and pushing, eventually we'll need a deload week or even longer than that. And that's then when we risk detraining. So oftentimes, we need to go into the gym and go, what am I capable of today? And I want to push. I'm in a frame of mind. I feel good enough that I want to push. But oftentimes it's just understanding, actually, if I have a light day today, or even just skip the gym altogether, go and do something different, go and get some sun, some fresh air, decompress a little bit, that when I come in the gym next time, I'll probably be rebounded and I can go a little bit harder. So to me, the selling point on that is actually your deloads are going to be shorter. You've got less risk of losing what you've worked hard for. And again, we're going to avoid any risk of this longer term maladaptive process.
I think that the longer you train, the more you understand your own body as well. So for newbies to the gym, it's very difficult to differentiate between, am I just falling into my old habits of being a little bit unmotivated, or is this actually a time where I need to deload? And the longer you train, the more you know your own body. I mean, I've definitely been guilty in the past of, just not taking enough. But I know in myself, as Brad said, now, if I really am completely fatigued, it's just time to take the foot off the gas, for sure.
Two terms that I try and really get across to my clients is subjective and objective. For the record, Lee, could you sort of give us an idea of what those two terms mean?
Yeah, I can, and I can give you examples for some research that we have completed now, and the paper's in review, so hopefully get published soon. So bear with me while I explain the protocol, because I think this will be quite useful. So what we were just talking about there about reactive deloads, and we flip that round, and actually we are quite robust people, and training the same muscle 2 or 3 times per week is not going to hurt necessarily. It's not going to harm us necessarily. And that's a strategy that well-trained individuals like you guys could use as a strategy, because this whole progressive overload model of train a little bit, then recover and we'll improve, and then train a little bit and recover and we'll improve a little bit more. If you're really well trained, that doesn't work more. The dose of training needs to be higher and higher and higher. And that means training more frequently or with more volume within sessions, training closer to failure, training with higher intensities. But we know we can't do that forever. But what we can do is hit it in little microcycles, what we might call an impact microcycle or an overreach, where we go, you know what, I will squat 4 times this week, and then I'll deload, and then I'll see my squat improve. And that's what we did. We looked at some of these strategies that are used in high-level powerlifting, high-level weightlifting, throw sports, other track and field sports. We put our participants through a battery of, it was like a squat every day program. So they came in on the Monday and they did 5 sets to failure with 80% of their 1 rep max. It's a heavy load, and that's a lot of volume to failure. Everything was controlled in the sense of like 5-minute rest periods between sets, that kind of thing. But every participant was lifting the same relative intensity, 8% of their maximum. Now, normally that'd be like, half your leg day. You might do a bit of accessory work and then go home and not repeat it until the Monday after. We just went, no, if overtraining is apparently a thing, let's try and overtrain people. Let's see what happens, so that then we can look at the subjective. So like that's perceptual, how do you feel? And the objective, what's happening to things like your jumps and your ability to create force rapidly, things like that. So we went, Tuesday, get back in, do the same session again. So they were impaired in their recovery. So they were coming in on day 2 and going, quads are a bit sore, and for us as scientists, we're like, well, that's let's verify that on a scale of 1 to 10. It's a 4, it's a 5, whatever. They work through the Tuesday. Now, what you might think there is, well, they're going to lift a little bit lighter, and we anticipated that, we expected it. So what we did was we just used some like velocity speed calculations to work out what their daily 80% was. So if they were moving some like lower loads slower, we knew that the higher loads would move slower. So we adjusted the loads. They do the 5 sets Tuesday, we got them in on Wednesday, and they just did the same thing again. And they did the same thing on Thursday and the same thing on Friday. So we had 5 days, 25 sets in 5 days of maximal work to failure. That's brutal. And we thought that would, for most people, lead to a big dropout. They get to day 3, and we had people on day 3 reporting like muscle soreness that had gone up by 250%. We had some people coming in the gym just going, I do not physically think I could even move with load on the bar. And we were like, oh, what a shame. Anyway, get under that bar, just get lifted. But they did, and you know, again, we were just like, look, all the risk factors about like you said about like narrow exercise selection, like repeatability of the same movements, heavy load, high volume, training to failure, impaired recovery. We were tracking things like stress and sleep and stuff, and as you can imagine, that was like all over the place. Jump scores were going down because our ability to, you know, create propulsion, create force, you know, that's suffering. We did some isometric testing, so they pull against the bar as hard and fast as they can, and we look at, can they achieve the same peak force, and if they can, does it take longer to get there? All these things that should be sensitive to fatigue, and these guys were broken by the end of it, right? So we're like, okay, but no one's dropped out.
At what stage was that, at the broken stage? Because you said Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they were fine. What point were they broken where they were like, it was severe drop-offs?
Everyone's journey was different. Now, we had someone that hit a PB on day 5, figure that one out.
Wow.
So the load on the bar went up. So I would never do this. This is not a strategy I would put into practice. But in theory, that would have been their best day to get on a platform and lift a big squat, right? But you've got to do 4 heavy days beforehand. That's not a strategy we tend to use. But day 3 seemed to be like the breaking point, and we kind of knew it. And, you know, we had one participant, you know, came in on day 3 and he just went, look, like, I've committed to this now. I'm on hump day as it was. But don't talk to me. He just went, psychologically, I'm not in a good place. I but I'm going to do this because I've committed to your study. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, like, I don't like this. Like, clearly, you know, you don't want to harm anyone. And all participants in any study can pull out at any point. So I'm like, do you want to pull out? And like, no, I'll keep going.
I respect that.
But yeah, absolutely. Now, where for me it got quite interesting was, like, again, like some of the objective, like the numbers, the numerical stuff like jumps, rate of force development, you know, that's all over the place. The subjective measures, all over the place. Some people were sleeping well, some people were losing sleep. Everyone reported the highest level of stress on day 1, which we thought was more of an anticipatory, like, I've got to do 5 days of this stuff. So that didn't surprise me. Everyone got through to 5 days. We gave them a week away from the protocol, and we gave them like a deload program. So it was just like a full body, twice per week, moderately challenging session or sessions. And then they come back 7 days later and we test their squat 1 rep max. And what we thought would happen was that we might see some people return to baseline, but we're definitely going to see some people in a hole, like really not in a good place. Everyone got better. Wow. Everyone improved relative to baseline. And we did some calculations like smallest worthwhile change, like is it practically meaningful? And everyone improved. Like we had one person put 10 kilos on their max. We had one person put 2 kilos on their max, but this was an ultra trained person. I mean, like most studies, they tend to use untrained participants because they're easier to access. One of the challenges that we had was, in order for ethics, the ethics board to say you can do this study, they needed to see that people were already quite robust and quite well trained. The problem with that is that well-trained individuals have their own training program. They don't like to break from that training program and probably compete in a sport. So we were having people say, I'd love to do your study, but I've got comp in 4 weeks. I'd love to do your study, but my coach won't let me. So it's very, very difficult to recruit for. But the fact that they all improved after a 7-day deload, to me, it was quite strange. Now, where it gets even more interesting is we then went, okay, that's good. No one's overtrained, you know, damn. Go away, do the same deload again, and we're going to test you at day 14. Half the group got better again. Not to the same magnitude, but we were adding like, you know, a couple of kilos on the bar from day 7, but half returned to baseline. So no one went lower than day 1. No one went lower than like pre-score 1 rep max, but half got better again. So now what you've tapped into is this term used in some of the literature called supercompensation kinetics, which is that given the same training program, we might improve, you might get worse. We've improved, but you can maintain your adaptations for longer than what I can. So now it's not only what is the dose of training and how do we orientate that in a way to get maximum gains, but then how do we orientate the taper or the deload, whatever you want to call it, to reach peak performance on competition day or to maintain it for as long as is possible. So that's the delicate balance. And again, going back to the original question about what's subjective and what's objective, numbers tell the story. Numbers don't lie. But again, what they do is they reduce the human aspects of coaching. So, your jump test is higher today. Let's have a big day. And what we found was there was a real disconnect. So, people were coming in and going, I feel rubbish, but hitting rep maxes, I actually feel really good today. I'm not sore, but they were just not moving well. So a good coach is able to understand and is able to communicate with their clients on how do you feel today, but let's kind of look at that comparable to some of the objective data. You need to bear in mind that there are some clients that can play the game, some athletes that I've worked with that play the game, they don't like training, they don't like hitting maxes, they don't like training to failure. So they will do everything they possibly can to tell you that they have a bad night's sleep, they've not eaten properly. Just so you give them a light day. Oh, mate, yeah, really? Absolutely. But there are some athletes that you'll just go, you are on a light day today, and you turn your back, you turn back round, and they're hitting a max because they've got a competition going off. So a good coach is able to kind of marry up this objective, the subjectiveness of training, and make executive decisions that are clearly in the best decisions for the client, but being able to communicate why those are the best decisions as well.
I just thought a rugby lad straight away as soon as you said
yeah
turn you back, they're doing some rep maxes.
Yep.
I can see how much of a minefield overtraining is in terms of testing studies, because even in that 5 days with all those people you tested, are you tracking their recovery? So are you tracking who's eating more, who's staying hydrated, how their sleep is? I can imagine, I know if it was me and that was me on the study, my appetite would go through the roof. My calories would immediately just completely go insane. And sometimes I know that from that, my body responds really well. It doesn't matter what stimulus you're putting on my body, how overtrained I am. If I just go, right, for the next 3 days, I'm going to have 1,000 calories over what I need to, you'd be surprised how long I can keep going for after that as well.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at one exercise, squats. Yeah. Everyone responds differently to different exercises. So what if you then combine that with some leg extensions at the end? How much does that affect the next day? And then you're looking at someone's whole session and the variedness of everyone's session and the variedness of how every individual recovers from different exercises. It's a minefield. It really is, in terms of actually pinpointing, right, what is overtraining? How do we get to it? Who experiences it in what way? It just seems, I'm fair play for you to take it on, but it isn't something that I would want to go down the avenue of, because I think there's so many variables. There really is.
Yeah, and there's very little research out there that says, is completing an impact cycle where we really ramp up the dose better long term than that kind of progressive overload model, and we don't know that yet. We do know that there is some potential benefit in condensing training, but like you said there, to condense training you need to reduce the exercise selection because the sessions are too long. There is too much allostatic load overall, and that's a model that's used in sports like weightlifting and powerlifting, because by the nature of their sports they have minimal exercises that you execute as part of competition. It has been done in bodybuilding. We don't know if an impact cycle or an overtraining phase is beneficial to muscle hypertrophy. My gut feeling tells me it's probably not, but it is used by bodybuilders. And you take CT Fletcher, for example. I think he had the world record bicep curl, 225 pounds for a few years, and he said overtraining is a myth. And before I started my research, I was like, this guy is an idiot, absolute idiot. 6.5 years later, I'm like, the guy's a genius. It's not a myth, but the thing is, mythology, it's a measurable thing. People have done work around, can you quantify what a myth is? Like John Mills, based out in New York, for example, has these 5 structural points as to what is a myth. And overtraining falls into all of those. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It just means that we've not observed it, given the parameters of, right back to Baruch Spinoza's definitions, a decrease in performance lasting 4 weeks or longer, whilst omitting other factors that might influence why your performance has decreased. So I think, again, what some of my research, and this is only one individual study that we've talked about so far, but what my research is telling us is actually we don't need to wrap up our athletes in cotton wool. It doesn't matter if we train when we're under recovered. it's a strategy that we might use, particularly in trained people, but it's not something that we can do for a long time. And I think that's where, coming back to the supercompensation kinetics, is some people can tolerate high doses of training for a long time. And some people will do it and go, that training program looks cool, that person's had good results, but they break so much sooner because of their physiology or their psychology. That's near impossible to determine.
The last time I saw you, Lee, was at Station Gym, and I'll not throw his name out just in case, but one of the guys at Station did the study.
He was a participant in the squat study, yeah.
And the reason why I've not thrown his name out is just in case he didn't finish it. But I remember speaking to him about, like, how are you finding it? And he says, it is so thorough. Lee's brilliant. And he said it's very ethical. And everything you just explained there, like, if you presented that to a board of ethics and said, right, we're going to batter these people, basically. Yeah. How does that process work? You mentioned, like, being presented to ethics board.
Of course.
Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't mention his name, because all participants need to be anonymised.
That's why I thought. Let me wait.
Yeah, so an ethics board is there. So the process of scientific research is that you generate an idea, and that idea is because you think that that's something we don't know yet, or we want to build on existing knowledge. So we generate a research question. Around that research question, we come up with a method, like structural points around the research. Is it going to be qualitative? Are we going to ask questions? Is it quantitative? Are we going to collect some numerical data? And you present that to an ethics board. And the ethics board, what their job is to say, is there an inherent risk to a participant? And if there is a risk, is it outweighed by the potential benefit? Now, for a study like mine, when I go, I want to intentionally overtrain a bunch of people, an ethics board will go, you want to what? And invariably they'll say no, but they realise that if safety points are put in place, if we can mitigate risk as much as possible, there is benefit to finding that out, because we can improve the way that people train, not just athletes, but everyone. Now, originally, I put in more than 5 days to the ethics board. I think I put in like 2 weeks. And I was just like, yeah, let's just keep them going. And the ethics board, unsurprisingly just went, we can't do that. Like, it's too potentially unsafe. There might be overuse injuries. There might be, even little things like the load on the bar on the traps could potentially lead to like lots of headaches, things like that, lots of neck ache, things that you might not consider. Automatically you think like, oh, you end up with like quad injuries or knee tendinopathies, but it's a bigger picture when it comes to risk. Eventually, we kind of decided on 5 days, and there were additional points where they were concerned about rhabdomyolysis, which is where your muscle proteins degrade so much that we can't build them back up. Now, that's hypertrophy training. That's our job, is we go in the gym and we damage the muscle tissue in order to provide a stimulus for it to grow back and supercompensate and end up with more muscle cells. With rhabdomyolysis, they degrade to such a magnitude that they can't repair, they become necrotic. And you can usually tell when you have rhabdomyolysis because you are ultra sore. Like, imagine the most sore you've been from training, double it. Then it lasts much longer, and you start urinating out your own myoglobin. So your urine goes like a cola colour because you're urinating out effectively, like the myoglobin.
Is it kidney failure? Or your kidneys essentially start processing proteins that break down proteins.
Yeah, they can't filter properly. So that's hospital best case, and clearly they were. One of the biggest risk factors is lots of volume. We see it sometimes in like hybrid sports, and because of the nature of the protocols that they go through. So we had to put a whole series of things in place to go, if we feel that this person is at risk of rhabdomyolysis, they are off the study. Now, we never got to a point where we went, that person needs to come off, like they are at too much risk. Some were getting there, but everyone got through. But again, it's about participants understanding that they are not subjects, and a subject is an unwilling participant. They're a participant that can pull out of a study at any time. And as frustrating as that is, as a scientist, we have to allow participants to do that. And oftentimes we reported this in ours, actually, like a drop-off rate. And in other studies, they'll report that. So in the results, they'll say, we recruited 100 participants, 80 completed the protocol. So good transparent research will actually talk about dropout and why people dropped out. We had one dropout before he did the first day, unrelated. He was just a little bit ill and kind of disappeared. Whether he was ill or whether he just went, actually, this is not for me. It doesn't really matter. But we had no one that dropped out during the sessions. which was good, clearly.
Yeah, brilliant.
I'm really curious. You mentioned about like generating ideas. This is one question I've always wanted to ask to, I suppose, someone who conducts research like you. Where did them ideas come from? Do you just sit around a campfire and be like, that'd be good, wouldn't it?
Not campfire, coffee.
There we go.
Much like what we're doing now.
Coffee,
What have we seen? What do we think's missing? Like, my research world all exists around lifting weights. I'm not interested in endurance sports. I'm not interested in anything other than how do we get big and how do we get strong. And I exist on each side of weightlifting. So the overtraining, what happens if we do too much? But then the other side, I've done quite a lot of work in deloading. What happens when we do too little? And when is too little a good thing and when is too little a bad thing? And for me, the overtraining was all born out of when I did my master's degree. I wrote a report about what is overtraining, and everything was endurance sports. And as I'm researching, I'm like, another running one, another cycling one. I'm like, where's the weightlifting, And there wasn't any. So that gap was identified just by reading, just by listening, just by watching. And then the deloading stuff, again, back to like kind of like definitions lead structure and structure leads existence. I was like, everyone talks about deloading. Most coaches know what a deload is. Most clients know what a deload is, but I could not find a tangible definition. And I wanted to do some experimental work in that area, but you can't do that until you know what a deload looks like and how it's defined. And no one had done that. So I was like, I'll do the definition. So, our team we were the first ones that created an operational definition of what a deload is so that other studies could utilize it. We haven't created anything new. We're just the first people that have gone, that's an actionable definition. So now you can go away and empirically research this. So in all honesty, identifying the gaps is just about living in that life. Not sat in an office reading paper after paper, but we're still working with athletes, having conversations like this and going, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'd like to find out.
I think a lot of science and studies within sport is all predicated on that. There's an idea here of like that a lot of people understand and is colloquially quite known within the industry. How do we make that tangible? How do we add some metrics to that and a scale and some kind of definition, like you said?
Essentially, it seems to be like spotting, I don't know, micro niches almost, or like I just imagine like what we do as coaches, and people say, find your niche, do this. There's a gap in the market. You're looking for gaps in numbers and studies and research, and you're like, no one's done that. Let me jump in and do it. So I'm glad it's not just throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. That's good to know.
Let's move on to some like, I guess, other people in the industry. Like we mentioned a few names before the podcasting, like Jeff Nippard, if I can get his name out. Jeff Nippard. Any of the other ones that you can think off the top of your head? There's like Dr. Mike Israel at the moment, who's getting big online. What are your thoughts around these guys and the kind of the younger generation, shall we call them, who are coming out now?
What I like about the platform that these guys have is they, for the most part, have a strong, solid scientific background. But where they found their niche, where they found their position within the industry, is a little bit like a buffer between what I do, in my white coat and my goggles, taking blood and things, but being able to communicate that to a wider audience, which is not my job. And no one is more important than anyone else. But there is a series of links that we can create from, someone creating a research paper right down to a client that will eventually embed that within their training. And it's just a stream. And for me, what those guys do really, really well is, not only digitally does the stuff look great and is engaging, but he's taking this complex information where, we have to, because of the nature of journals, use overcomplicated terms and statistics and methods and things like that, but actually just say how it is. This is what this means in practice. Now, sometimes our research can be really, really controlled. Everything was controlled. These people ate the same thing, the same amount of calories, they did the same training, and this is what we found. But no one trains like that in real life, and no one's going to count their calories to that degree. So then what happens if it's in an uncontrolled environment in the real world? And I think those guys act really well to kind of interpret what that information means and then relate it to a wider audience. I mean, kind of as a segue to that in a sense is I am a massive advocate of podcasts as an educational resource. Just another little project that I have going off at the moment is in university, we teach students to use peer-reviewed literature, so journal articles. because peer review means that it's been sent out to experts in that area and they validate and they verify the facts and then they go, that's good to go. But podcasts aren't. Like, I could be saying any old rubbish right now and you guys could be doing the same, and we send it out there and, you know, we're authoritative in the industry and people just go, well, that must be true. This isn't peer reviewed. But all I've done there is talk you through my study in a different way to how it's written. So why would that not be validated? So for me, it's how could we ensure that podcasts are used in a way that's validated and accurate, but presents things in a way that's more actionable for people, for the audience?
I think what they're doing is great because they are very sciencey and they're breaking it down, like I said, in a very simplistic way. But before those guys existed, because there was a time when people weren't doing that, right? And it was just CT Fletcher on a YouTube video and a gym in Compton going, if you want big arms, train them every day for the next year. And you're like, sounds a little bit intense now. And that was actually something he was quoted as saying. I remember as a kid listening to him say that, I go, yeah, I want really big, strong arms. Maybe I'll do that for a year. I think I got about 18 days in from it. I was like, arms are so. But they are also trying to get involved in some studies. There's a guy called Brett Contreras, which is the glute guy. Yeah. And I know he's been involved in some studies around glute training and things like that, which I think is also giving them some more validity to what they do, for sure.
I was going to ask you what the missing link is. You mentioned those links to communication. Yeah. You mentioned podcasts. Do you think that is the link that we can really do better with?
Potentially. I think what becomes very, very difficult, particularly for those that are perhaps new to training and can't differentiate good information from bad information, is I've listened to some awful podcasts where I'm just sat there just going, this is wrong. The information is incorrect. Even... This might sound kind of like self-fulfilling or quite precious, but even stuff that I've done and published and people are talking about, and I'm like, that is not what I've said. And that is not what I meant. But your interpretation of that information has now cascaded into giving incorrect information with my name on it. You know?
Yeah.
So that's what we need to be careful of but it's impossible to set up a peer-reviewed system for things like chats. So really it's just about how do we navigate a world where anyone can communicate anything, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what's actually appropriate and accurate or not.
Can we maybe ban certain terms like according to a study, and then that's it?
Yeah.
maybe that's what we need to try and show.
Yeah. I think maybe is it going to fall on you guys eventually to be like, right, this is from a sciencey point of view exactly what the study shows, and this then is our second follow-up document to the public to make it more easily digestible. Is there any way you can see your industry developing in that sense, where you're like, this is the kind of generalized version for people to go and interpret in any way they want and make it almost bulletproof to interpretation from exterior people?
Absolutely. I think research reviews do that really well. They tend to be behind paywalls, so they're like a subscription model, but you have scientists now that will set up a research review where they will take interesting papers that have been published that month and re-communicate that in a digestible way. That to me is a really nice way forward. But again, things like YouTube, they also do that really, really well. I also think that things like blogs have a lot of value, but they have value for me because as I read through them straight away, I go, that's great, this is incorrect. That is spoken about as like, according to this study, this is what we should all do now. And I'm like, nah, it's a lot more nuanced than that. We have now, more than ever, a great number of ways that we can communicate scientific information. But for me, it all comes down to, you know what, let's try this. Let's try it. If there is a study that says trains at arms, 3 times in a week, let's see what happens. Perhaps not like 18 days plus. I did the same thing, funnily enough. I ended up with tendinopathy and I couldn't train for 6 months.
I'm pretty sure that's what I got, because I had an issue with my tricep where I couldn't even do bench press because my tricep was so fatigued. I was getting pain in my elbows and all sorts. I please don't train arms every day.
No, don't. But these are things like, I forget the name of the scientist now, but like they win Nobel Prizes for like injecting themselves with like bacteria and Helicobacter pylori to like, will this kill me? and it doesn't end up winning a Nobel Prize. I'm like, I want a Nobel Prize for trying to overtrain myself, just to kind of see what happens. I can't remember, it was a few years back now, but I was just like on the preacher curl every day, just like arms were getting massive.
I was the same, mate. You filled out a little bit. I was like looking good.
Cheers. I was like,
maybe training, go back to that, but that was working.
I was like, I couldn't move, but like once I warmed up, I was like, and the arms were seriously growing, and there was a point where I went for one rep on one set, and my arm just went, no, mate. And then, you know, that whole like tendinopathy where you just can't bend your arm. But it was like that for months and months. So I was like, that was the point. But again, going back to the definitions of overtraining, injuries and overtraining are often talked about as synonymous things. They're not. The etiology, the cause is completely different. Overtraining is not a localized effect. It's a decrease in performance. A tendinopathy is a localized effect. And again, whilst we talk about things like burnout, which is basically like training apathy. I don't want to train, I've lost my motivation. You don't always get that when you're overtrained. You want to train more, you're just getting frustrated that you're not getting the results. There are conditions where, you know, like low energy availability, where you reduce your calories, your performance will tank, because calories are protective. They just delay the overtraining response. But remember that in our flowchart of diagnosis, we have to rule that out. So it's no longer overtraining syndrome. Injuries has a different cause, has a different effect, it's more localized. There are all these peripheral conditions that all result in this long-term performance effect, but are all different in how we diagnose them, but are different in terms of treatment plan as well. Like having tendinopathy in an arm, I could still potentially go and squat or leg press or whatever. I can still train. If I am burnt out, I can switch training to being a little bit more fun, you know, increase the amount of exercise selection, add a bit of element of like, you know, flexibility in there. If we've got what could be like low energy availability, relative energy deficiency in sports, as it's often called, is, you know, we start to ramp the calories right up, and dependent on the severity, we can still train. But with overtraining, it's like, no, just stop training now. This is not the time to tweak training. No amount of calorie increase will get you back out of that hole if you carry on training. You just need to stop. So this complex web, it's like this Venn diagram of all these different overlapping conditions that all have the same central diagnostic point. And again, that's why we tend to like get a little bit, it's difficult to differentiate, I think is where we'll go with that.
I think that, again, that's where it comes down to understanding your own body and understanding which exercises and styles of training you categorise in terms of intensity. So if I'm really, really overtrained, my go-to is just like a really steady spin bike session, just 20-30 minutes on there. Cross trainer I quite like as well. I'm going to stay away from like your high rock style training. I'm going to stay away from your bodybuilding, supersets, you know, hypertrophy work. It just brought a thing into my mind actually from back when I was at uni. I read something by Dorian Yates, and his training partner was Leroy Nasty. His nickname was Nasty. I can't remember his second name, but he was the guy screaming at Dorian Yates as he was doing like leg extensions and stuff. And if you look at any training video of those guys from back in the day, it was all just balls to the wall. And then he came out in this article and said, "Oh, we only did that for like 4 to 6 weeks." The next kind of 10 to 12 weeks after that was all just standard sets, gentle stuff, let my body recover. So they had this periodization, but no one actually knew that. So people would be just kind of trying to copy his training for months and months on end, completely burn out, realise I'm never going to look like him and just give up. And again, there was probably no context to those things. We just, again, as people who train and want to look a certain way, perform a certain way, we see these guys and we just go, right, that's the way to train. That's what we've got to do. And I think it's about understanding programming as well alongside that.
It is. And so like building upon that and like understanding individual response. Like I'm at an age now where I probably won't get more muscular. I can get stronger, but I'm offsetting muscle loss as I gradually begin to decay, right?
Hormones not enough.
No, mate, no. Anabolic resistance, I think they call it, don't they? But I'm in the gym quite frequently because I have the luxury of time, and I also have a son that loves training, so I'm in the gym with him quite a lot. But my ability to recover between sessions is awful, particularly when I train with high volume. So the reason why I'm in the gym frequently is I have to train frequently to get the same amount of volume across the week. I can't split train or anything like that because I can't recover properly. I don't respond well to volume. But if I split my training down into more frequent chunks, I can train with lots of intensity and I can still make marginal gains. That's only me as an individual, but it is about learning what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes you just need to make those decisions on, you know what, let's just try something. Let's just see what happens. As long as we're mitigating risk, what's the worst that can happen, you know?
Speaking of your son, you just showed us a picture before. He's jacked.
He is, isn't he?
Your son's
He's the man of the house.
Jacked.
Yeah.
Take the bins out, Dad. And we were mentioning before the podcast, like how good that approach is for them as well, to come to you with ideas they've seen online and be like, well, I kind of know the area pretty well and I'm going to warn against that. But do you know what? Fuck it. Let's just try it, see what happens. You know, let's make some mistakes. Let's learn. It's going to be an education process. And we've all done that in the past where we get convinced in our own minds. Jeff Nippard's described it so well. It must be 100% right. And then you try it and you just tank on it for whatever reason. So, yeah, just trial and error with the young generation, absolutely. How often are you training with him? How often does he get into the gym?
Probably 3 or 4 times per week. So my son took up Olympic weightlifting when he was 6.
That's really young. Wow.
Yeah, which I think for listeners that perhaps don't kind of understand the risks and the benefits for young people to undertake resistance training. When I say took up Olympic weightlifting, this was, you know, with a broomstick, looking at how do we move appropriately. And once we've mastered movement, that's then adding a little bit of load. Now, I didn't train him. He had a fantastic coach, Dave Hembrough, who's trained Olympians.
We've got Dave coming on as well.
Great. Oh, brilliant, right?
Yeah.
It'd be much more philosophical than what I will be. But, you know, just being able to watch my son move better and then start to add load and get more confident with that. And the way that, you know, Dave and the other coaches would go, you know what, you're 6, you're 7, you're not going to do 3 sets of 8 on bench press. But you know what we could do? We could set up some foam rollers at the other end of the gym, get a med ball and try and knock them over. It's the same movement, it's the same muscles, but it's fun and it's competitive. Fun first, adaptation second in younger adults. Now, he competed a few times, and by the time he was 9, I've got a couple of videos, he was squatting 50 kilos for 5.
Wow.
You know, big, strong guy, clearly gifted. He must get his genetics from his mum. I don't think it's from me. But the difficult thing was, in a sport like Olympic weightlifting, where it's the same lifts, eventually he got a little bit bored, a little bit burnt out with it. Now, you know, I could have just gone, no, you need to persevere. But, you know, at that point, he's like 9, 10 years old. I'll tell you what, if you don't want to do this sport, you come away from it. And he did. And a couple of years later, he was like, look, I don't want to do weightlifting. I want to lift weights. I want more flexibility. I want more freedom. And that's then when we started going to the gym. Now, it's a shame, really, that there are not many gyms, particularly in Sheffield, in this local area, that will allow children to train for various reasons. Some I completely agree with. But now we have a program that it uses like an ecological dynamics approach, like a constraints-led approach, where I give him a loose template of a program. It's not like exercise 1 is bench press and exercise 2 is leg press, whatever. I just give him the patterns. Like, today, these are the muscles that will work, and your job is I want you to choose a vertical pull exercise. He then goes, okay, well, I'd like to do pull-ups, or I'd like to do a lat pull down. Absolutely fine. If it fits the pattern, we're good. So he's learning about exercise selection, and he's learning a little bit about order. He's choosing the weights to a degree, and we talk about like how close to failure we want him to train and things like that. But then if he comes back with an idea, and he loves things like YouTube, you know, he listens to a lot and he watches a lot. I mean, we watched a couple of weeks back, we watched Pumping Iron, you know. 1975 Olympian. That is a rite of passage.
I was just about to say them words. That is a right. I've seen my future. This is it.
And he watched it all the way through.
All the way through, yeah. And then straight after, he was like, right, let's watch the 1980 comeback. And I was like, yes, this is what being a parent's all about. But there are certain things where it'll be like, you know, I've seen about like length and partials. Can we try it? Or I've heard about this thing called drop sets. Can we try it? And I'm like, you know what? Why not? Why not? And then you report back to me how that feels, whether you feel that that's beneficial. And if there's a point where I feel that I need to go, I think that's a bad decision, then I will justify it. But if I'm like, you know what, best way for you to learn is just by trying it. Let's see how you respond to it. Let's see if you enjoy it. Because it's 14 now. I still wanting to enjoy training. And then let's make a decision in the longer term. So, you know, he now is at a point where he'll tell me, like, what other 14-year-old programs JM presses for their dad, you know? That's what he said to me the other day, and he was like, you don't do it like that, you need to wrap your thumb around the bar like this. And I was like, that's brilliant, that's what I want to create is a confident, adaptable individual that loves training, because if they love training, they're more likely to carry on doing it, aren't they?
Yeah. It sounds likely they're going to pass it on to other people as well.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing legacy. Is there anything that you've outright just said, no, that's a dumb idea?
No, not really. I think for me, the most enjoyable part of the approach is the drive to the gym, where we talk about this is what we're going to do. And if anything comes up where I'm like, you know what, George, I don't think we should try that. And it's usually just like, can we just do like a mega arm day? It'll be something like that. Or can we do like German volume training squats? And I'm like, that's cool. That's fine. But why do you want to do it? Like, what you explain to me what you feel the benefit is. And so it seems to be just like mad random ideas that you might have, but nothing where I've gone outright, no, like, we're not doing that.
I think you've hit the nail on the head with so many ways of introducing kids from a young age into sport, exercise. And you're right, there isn't like a massive amount of places that will do and take on kids of that age and coach them quite complex lifts. I've heard so many amazing things about Hallam Barbell. But a lot of the clients we get come to us and they're so nervous because they've just never moved their body from a young age, and that meant that they didn't get into sports. If you can just nip that in the bud at 6 years old and go, let's just go and do a little bit of weightlifting. Even if they're not massively into it, just keep showing up. Same with like when I take my little girl to swimming. She's not going to jump in the pool and start doing lifts.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, for the first 4 months, it got really boring, even for me, because we were doing the same boring stuff, same little session. And all of a sudden, then she starts kind of like moving by herself and grasping it and getting it. And that's such an amazing moment as a parent where you're like, she understands it now. I can see her improving. The confidence is growing. She's not crying as I take her in. And I can imagine weightlifting for your little one was exactly the same. It's just that seeing that development and then that interest and that kind of passion starting to develop a little bit.
Yeah, it's what you would call a donor activity. It enhances physical performance in pretty much every single sport, but it's so transferable. And, you know, you take like football, for example, you know, a lot of young lads, they play football and that's all they want to do. It's not that transferable skill, and we tend, and I'm being quite stereotypical now, but we tend to focus on the outcome being we want you to turn pro. In reality, like, what is it, like 1 in 10,000 people will sign a pro contract. It's probably even fewer than that, but it's always like turn pro, not let's enjoy it for what it is, which is physical fitness, health, social aspects of it. For me, you know, resistance exercise is the perfect opportunity to go, let's just have fun being fit, so that when we get to that, you know, you finish school and there tends to be a dropout in competitive sports, at least you've still got an activity there where we can, you know, manage our health and manage our performance and transfer that to other different sports if we choose to.
Yeah, you mentioned about donor activities, which I've never heard those two words together, but I think it's brilliant. Obviously my philosophy with my little boy is just to introduce him to as much as we can and almost wait for him to ask to do it again. A constant has been his bike. We've recently introduced him to climbing. Is there any other donor activities that you think that might be really cool to introduce from a young age, where the transferability is going to be huge?
Parkour.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine, Ben Strafford at Hallam, has looked at parkour as being a donor sport, not a donor activity, but a donor sport, because it's competitive, can be competitive in nature. So we've been out collecting data from parkour athletes to profile their characteristics and their capabilities, to build up an idea of like what they're good at and why they're good at that. But it's so brilliant to see like kids just having fun, jumping on and off things, climbing on things. And, you know, to me, like, part of the like the rhetoric around kids lifting weights is it stunts their growth and damage to growth plates and stuff like that. Now, a child with 10 kilos on their bike is a lot less force on the musculoskeletal system than jumping off a climbing frame that's 6 foot in the air, right? But we don't tell people not to. We don't tell kids not to do that. We go, you're lifting weights, don't do that. It will stunt your growth, which is complete nonsense, if I'm being honest. And, you know, scientifically, we know that that's not the case.
It's actually the opposite, isn't it? I think it stimulates the growth plates, and we've mentioned that a few times on the podcast, like our history with lifting and how my parents especially were always like, don't lift too heavy because you'll stunt your growth and you'll never grow.
My mum still says it now. Like, be careful, lifting them weights won't be bad.
Don't take too much creatine. I've heard some things online about that. You can
we've all had that one, haven't we? Is this steroids? No.
I'm not sure about these proteins powders you take. It's a little bit funny for me.
But it's such a challenging dogma to break down. Like, you know, like my parents, for example, love them to bits, but they'll be like, is George doing a bit too much in the gym? I'm like, I have a PhD, Mum, in strength training.
Yeah.
I know what I'm doing with this kid, you know?
My dad did it to me when I kind of post some pictures of me doing like 200 kilos plus on a deadlift. He'd be like, just be careful, because, you know, we've all had bad backs in our family. I don't want you to go down the same route. I'm like, being good, don't worry.
Love that. A couple of random questions we had, Lee, from, we put it out on his Instagram. One, I don't mind shouting him out, actually. Envisage training. Definitely Adam, who's asked, I'm going to lower the tone now. I'll read it word for word. Ask Lee to say his name like this: L.Bell and Lee.B. He has the most satisfying name ever.
L.Bell and Lee.B. Is that what it is?
I think that's basically what it means, mate.
Is it the accent? Is it the Yorkshire accent?
It must be, yeah. It must be. But what a top guy Adam is, and what a top company envisager.
Yeah, obviously we've got Dave Irison coming in, if I've pronounced his surname right as well. Yeah. So he's coming on very soon as well. So, yeah, and obviously you still do a bit of work for Envisage as well. Cool.
Used to work for them full time, teaching gym instructor, personal trainer qualifications back in the day, which is where we met, wasn't it?
That's making me feel old. Back in the day.
But eventually, you know, like with any job, you want a bit of a new challenge. So I've kind of moved away from there, but still loosely involved.
What were your observations working with soon-to-be PTs? Is there any, I nearly said the word myth then, but after everything you've just said, I nearly didn't say that. Anything that you notice some commonalities?
I think probably an overinflation of someone's knowledge. You know, I train, I look good, therefore I know what I'm doing. And the first lecture is like cardiovascular physiology, and then all of a sudden they're just like, wow. Like,
I mean, social media influences to a T, right?
Absolutely. Or, you know, like, I've heard this off this influencer, this must be correct. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. And I found myself being very much like, look, you're on a course, we're all here for the right reason, is to make this industry as good as what it can be. What I don't want to do right from day one is just go, here is a bunch of information that's put you off. But sometimes, you know, when someone does think that they know a little bit too much, it's sometimes nice to just go, here's more information that challenges what you're thinking. Not intentionally, not to belittle people, but sometimes a little bit of a hit of realism, a bit of reality isn't that much of a bad thing. Same for me as well, you know. Like, we're always learning, and I think the other thing, there is one thing that kind of grinds on me a little bit, and that's a little bit where people use the title doctor or I have a PhD as a, like, I know everything, you know. Having a PhD just means you've got your license to be an independent researcher. And much like, you know, when you pass your license to drive a car, you don't just stop learning. You're continually learning about routes, about how to maneuver effectively. A researcher is a lot like that now. Like, there are research collaborations that I'm in now where people are talking about things that I've never heard of, but I love it, you know. And it's not like I know everything. It's more like, how cool is this when you've just mentioned that particular thing, and I just want to know more.
When we speak to the coaches, I think you can quite easily tell who's going to do really well, especially in the early stage of their journey, because they ask more questions rather than them trying to convince you of things they know, because they want to learn, they want to absorb. They're like a little sponge. Whereas when you hit a bit of a barrier with someone, we're like, no, this is my way, and I'm going to tell you why I do things my way. It's a little bit tricky, and you know they're only going to go so far, right? Because it's. I mean, even 10 years in, I'm still learning loads, and there's still people who come to me with challenging issues that just make you think, oh yeah, I'm very kind of, you know, whimsical in this area. I need to kind of go and research. And
I once heard someone described it as like the never-ending role or the never-ending industry, because there's always something to do. There's always some training to transition into. There's always some area to improve or to try. Speaking of new PTs, is there anything you believe PTs can do to equip himself a little bit better, and maybe to stop falling into the maybe attention grabbing trap, the ones that actually this information that you're putting out is validated? Is there anything that you can recommend for those?
To be honest, I think you've both answered that question for me, in the sense of, you know, like, testament to you guys. Like, I'm completely not surprised that you've lasted that long in an industry where, you know, like, most people don't survive that first 6 months. And I think your attitude answers that question of always willing to learn, always willing to engage in additional information, always willing to overcome challenges. Like, I've come across this situation with a client, I don't know what to do, but you know what? I'll find out. Not, this is the way that I train myself and it works for me, therefore you're all going to follow this program. So again, we're always learning in the same way that, you know, like I'm learning from you guys. So you take the deloading, for example, like, okay, we've got a definition in place, but I want to know how people deload in the real world outside of my lab. The best way for me to do that is to ask you guys what you would do, look at commonalities, look at features, create a framework of good practice, and then go and look at that empirically in a laboratory scenario. That to me is what good research is. It's collaboration, not I'm in charge, this is what you guys should do in your practice, but what are you doing in your practice? How can I take that information and validate it or tweak it or figure out the mechanisms that underpin why it's working for you? So it's very much bi-directional again.
In a full circle moment, when I first became an assessor, like endpoint assessor to actually qualify new PTs, I always got in the back of my mind, what would Lee do? And that's probably the biggest smoke I can blow, to be honest. I always think that. And one thing I always think is like the sponge mentality in terms of what can I absorb and then what do I actually need to squeeze out and get rid of? How can maybe just anyone in general, you don't have to be a coach listening, you could just be an everyday person. How can you be a sponge and know what to squeeze out? Because I'm aware that a lot of people's sponges now are just getting fuller and fuller and fuller and they believe everything. Yeah. Like, how do they know what to squeeze out?
I would tend to approach education a little bit like I would approach training, and much like what we've talked about there, is sometimes there's a window of opportunity to train hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's a window of opportunity to read a book, to listen to a podcast, to, you know, do whatever you need to do to learn about a particular subject. But there's also little pinch points where we just haven't got the bandwidth to take that information in. So don't force it, you know, just let it occur naturally. That would be my best advice. And that's advice that I follow as well. You know, I tend to try and map out my month of what have I got on. And if I've got a busy period, I'm not reading studies because I'm not taking that information in. I'm not listening to podcasts. But, you know, if I've got a spare hour, I might listen to 10 minutes. I might just read a little bit of something, make a few notes and come back to it.
Where does that brain come from for you? I don't know, like, I always think that critical thinking brain, I'm like, how on earth did that develop? Like, is there any activities you put that down to?
Or just a complete lack of trust in human beings. I think I just don't believe anything now. It always astounds me. Like, I'm not a social media person. I don't really put content out there.
Just your trainers.
Just your trainers. Yeah, mate, sneaker collections.
We'll get on to that.
Sneaker collections is a priority, right? I forgot what I was saying. Social media stuff, wasn't it?
Yeah, you're not on social media.
That's critical stuff. Yeah, so it always astounds me when people will share posts that are clearly just clickbait, like this missing person, and you're like, that's not a missing person. People have no critical reasoning skills for the most part, and I think for me, it's a skill that needs to be trained, and that's what a degree is for. That's what university is for. Is, you know, most our sport degrees are 3 years long, and in the first year we mark things that are descriptive only. So we present information, mechanistic, theoretical information. We then create a task, a report or whatever it might be. You recite that information back to us, and if they do that, they pass. But in the second year, we start to go, you know what? What do you think about that? Where do you think this works, and where do you think the limitations are? And that's what critical perspective is. It's about being able to appraise and evaluate. So it's, okay, this is what's been presented to me as a fact. And often in the media, things are talked about very objectively. You know, 5 best ways to do this, you know. You can't wait till number 5. It's those like horrible type article, right? You know,
and they get you every time as well.
Yeah,
I've got to know what number 5 is.
Exactly. It's just so clever, isn't it? But you know, it's going, okay, why might that work? Would it work for me in my particular training environment, my particular lifestyle? And where might it not work? And if it's not going to work, is it worth doing? That to me is what critical skills are. So basically, just don't trust anything.
Is that annoying for? I don't know if George has got this as well. Is that quite annoying if George ever goes, but why, Dad? Have you ever muttered the words, because I said so? You don't strike as the sort of guy.
Well, that's my last resort. Because I just told you, mate, just go and do that, please. But no, I think some people are just naturally critical in the way that they think. They're very analytical and can compartmentalise information really well. And one of the things I love about him and his approach to training is he just asks why. But, you know, as an educator, I love answering those questions. And I think, I don't know if you guys agree with this, but I think there's something quite powerful in saying, you know what, I don't know.
Yeah.
And when I first started tutoring, I do think, and it's going like a long time now, but I think I fell victim sometimes to trying to like almost fudge an answer because you're authority, if you're at the front of the room, you should know everything about everything. And now, if it's not in my existence, if it's not related to strength training or training in general, I just like, you know what, I don't know. And I'm not even interested. You want to know about marathon running? Oh, mate, I don't know. Go and speak to that person instead.
You've just reminded me of many years ago, I put a post out, and it's one of my only viral posts that got quite a bit of traction. And I was doing some shrugs, and I put, here I am as a coach training the most important muscles a coach can have, and I'm literally doing some shrugs, and I'm like, I don't know muscles. And I always remember it spread really far, and I'm like, I just slept on that one day and put it out. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Just shrugging your shoulders and saying, I don't know, but I'll find out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean,
it's a great analogy, that, yeah.
It is, and you guys do such a great job. Like, I've tried it. I've tried the social media, like, let's present a bit of information, but I just kind of tend to find that, like, what am I going to do? Like 10 greatest methods for your experiments, like, you guys are coming across questions from clients on a daily basis. And what a great vehicle that is to turning that into a post, into a reel or whatever it is, to help people to engage a wider audience. And I love that. And this is, again, where I learn, like, I think, I follow a lot of hashtags, like hashtag overtraining, hashtag strength training. And I love watching them. And I'll come across them and I'm like, yeah, rubbish, delete, unfollow, block, whatever. But some stuff I'll be like, that's really cool. And that's the kind of stuff that you guys are doing where I'm like, you know what, I'll try that. I've not come across that before,
Some of the best content does come from people asking you questions as a coach, and maybe it's things you've thought about in the past yourself. I mean, the amount of ideas you actually think about on an annual basis that would make amazing posts, but you just forget. And then someone asks you the same question back to you that you had a few years ago, and you're like, I forgot about that. But yeah, you're right. These are my thoughts on it at the time. But actually, things have changed since then, and things have come out, and maybe I've read this on this subject. And again, ever evolving. We're constantly changing our opinions on things as well. That's another thing.
Yeah.
It's not just not knowing what it is. It's also like, well, I actually thought this 2 years ago, but today, based on like the research and some things I've done personally, this is what I think the better approach is.
That is my greatest fear. And I've seen that already. Like my first paper in Overtraining, 2020, I think it was. I don't agree with half of what's in there now because things have evolved and changed. And what worries me is that someone picks up that one paper and makes all of their decisions off that one paper. And I'm like, yeah, but things have changed. And I think that's the thing with social media, for example, is, don't just alter your belief system on one post, on one ethos. Is, again, try and be critical and try and look around that area.
I'm really happy you mentioned like podcasts and audio books and things like that as well, because I think social media is so 30 seconds of a very complex subject, whereas it's, take the time to go. And sometimes, I mean, we've had it before where we've got a subject that we want to talk about on the podcast, for example, and I will go on to Apple Podcasts and just type in like pelvic floor. I've had a pelvic floor expert on. I know very little about the pelvic floor. We openly said that's the lady who came on, but I wanted to know a little bit more. So I probably sat through maybe 5 hours worth of various podcasts, just trying to gain as much knowledge as I could. And that for me was like almost like a month's worth of work, I think, absorbing someone's, life work and then condensing it down into a podcast. You just gain so much knowledge from those longer format pieces of content.
And you never know when learning all the steps of glycolysis off by heart or the cotropin releasing hormone ACTH stuff, you never know when that's going to come in useful, right?
This is true. When the last time a client asked us that?
I was going to say, it's not come up yet.
It's in there. One day I'll be at a party and someone will go, what's that glycolysis thing? Then I'll be like, here is my moment.
I'm glad you asked, mate. Got to.
It's unlikely, but you never know.
Ryan, you're sat on edge of your seat. Should we get into the real discussion today about Lee's trainer collection?
So you walked in some Saucony Shadow 6000s today.
Yeah.
I like those.
Hannon collaboration.
They were, yeah. And you've got the Hannon t-shirt.
Yeah. all for championing independent retailers.
But how many trainers have you got?
I'm not entirely sure, mate, to be fair. A couple of wardrobes worth. But
wow.
You know what? Nothing catches my eye anymore, and I think it's because I'm getting older. And I've got this cracking pair of 95s, and I'd love to wear them, but I was kind of like,
Are you past that now?
My kid and all his mates wearing. I'm like,
it's funny because they come back around, don't they?
They
Fashion.
do, yeah. The neons came back out, didn't they, last week? But I think now I am an avid passive viewer of really cool sneakers, unless there's something that like really catches my eye.
Yeah,
I was devastated when the Yeezys went into Sports Direct.
Yeah. I think it's Kanye's fault himself for that, isn't it?
It absolutely is. But I've got some like the V1 Wave Runners, like 700s, my absolute favourites, right?
Yeah,
I've got like two.
What colour? I've got a pair of them.
The Wave Runners with the yellow lace, the blue, green, little orange on the back.
I've got the Moire ones.
They're nice, them purple ones
don't
with the
see
little
them,
line.
you don't see them often.
So those are the only two pairs that haven't gone into Sports Direct. So I'll still wear the Wave Runners occasionally.
Right.
But the other ones I was just like, ruined. Like you used to have to like queue up and raffle for these shoes.
Do you know what? I feel like shoes aren't as like they're not as sought after. I mean, I think about like the Weatherspoon collaboration with Nike.
Yeah. What?
Sean like,
the
Sean
97 ones.
Yeah. Like, they were like iconic just in the colourways. No one didn't like that shoe, but they were so hard to get. I don't feel like there's any shoes like that anymore. I feel like they mass produce them so much now, and there's not really like limited releases.
Yeah.
Half my collection upstairs is just a limit. I had a lot more. I've had to taper them down. As like the missus has been like, "Come on, what we doing with all these shoes? I've worn those in 5 years."
Yeah,
and I've had to get rid of it. But the ones I've kept are just ones that I know like hold value now, and they won't get released. I hope they won't get re-released, but you never know.
You can never tell these days, can you? But the Weatherspoon ones, those are the only ones that I. The thing is, they're £1,200 now. I can't justify that. Like.
I've got a pair upstairs that aren't far off that price.
But for the layman listening, did you say Weatherspoon?
Because Weatherspoon.
I'm thinking they look like blue, like the Weatherspoon's playing.
Can you imagine if Weatherspoons brought a shoe out? Well, you can get like Lidl and Greggs and stuff. So
that's what I thought.
Maybe that should be our business idea.
I'll do their own now. So we've got the middle layer. I've
got some of them because they look like Hirachis, and I bought them and I was like, these are going to blow up. These are going to be worth loads, and they are not worth loads.
It's a limited edition for a reason.
Yeah.
Didn't sell very well.
Did you ever walk into the wardrobe, like look in your shoe collection and go, "It's George who took them"?
Well, he's a little bit taller than me now, but last year we went through this very temporary phase where he was the same shoe size as me. So I'd open the wardrobe and be like, they're missing.
It's good that you know that. You obviously know your collection.
They're organised. They are organised.
Yeah.
But you know what, right? Absolutely ruined me. I went to work in a pair of ZX 8000s Aquas, right? They're a 1989 reissue, and I had the pair in 1989, and they came back out, raffled for them, got them, and I was like, they're a very like vibrant light blue and neon yellow shoe. Absolutely love them to bits. And I went to work, and someone just went, "Why are you wearing kids' shoes?" Like, because of how bright they are. And it's just ruined it for me now. And now I can't wear them.
I've had to have a few shoes that I've won raffles on, and I've got them home. My missus gone, "You've just bought those because you won the raffle." Like, you know what I mean? Yeah. You enter all these raffles and you forget, and you get billed for them, and you get all these shoes for it. I've got a pair of they're like high top Nikes. I can't remember exactly what they are, but it was the kind of when they were bringing out the ones with the spikes on the bottom. And I remember when I saw them online, I was like, they've got running spikes on a high top. What the hell's going on with those? But they look funky and cool.
Like the off-white ones?
Yeah, the
off-white
ones. Off-white, yeah. And they're hideous. I wouldn't be seen dead in them, but I like them. They've got everything value. Probably sell them at some point.
Well, when I won the Wave Runners on raffle, I was on holiday with the family on the coast, and I just applied for it, and I won it. I was like, "Oh, brilliant!" And then the next day, I got this notification, like, "Your shoes are getting delivered tomorrow." And these were like mega sought after shoes. So I drove home, sat waiting, and then they got delivered and then just drove back on holiday. Good job I went abroad, otherwise I'd have probably flown back and ended up getting divorced. But like, these are the things that you would do back in the day. Whereas now, I think I've worn the same pair of like scruffy Nike trainers for work the whole semester, just because like there's just nothing that's catching my eye. Or the fact that we have to wear a maroon top at work.
It doesn't really go with much.
Certain things just don't go with maroon.
I feel like the Sauconys, the New Balance, they're the ones that are catching my eye at the moment. I've not got a massive amount of those, but they're the ones that are a bit more funky and cool, and they kind of hold their style, I think, those shoes. Whereas the Off-White collaborations with Nike, they kind of come and go a little bit, haven't they? They've not held up.
I'm very much of the like, if you know, you know type shoes now. Like you said, like with the Sauconys. If you know that they're a collab, if you know that they're a cool shoe, people get it. And if they don't need to know, do they? So that's what I'm into now. Those kind of like they're not the Nikes, they're not the Adidases, the stuff that's just a nice shoe.
I think that's proper dad chat, that. So as you get older, you want it to feel good, not be too like the kids, because the kids aren't wearing Sauconys and New Balance either, are they? So,
Carhu, that's my brand at the moment. Really like Carhu, Finnish brand.
I've not heard that.
But someone from Finland said to me, there was like, in Finland, that's the equivalent of you guys wearing Umbro. It kind of ruined me a little bit. I was like,
is it? Oh no, it's not so after
running around in Umbros, but they're again like independent shoe. Kanye wore them for a while, but that's irrelevant. We don't need to talk about that. But they're just really well made, really nice shoe, and I would definitely recommend. Why have we got on this topic? I don't know, but
because you're the shoe man, mate.
I've never seen Ryan come to life like this before. We've had some amazing guests on, and Ryan just boom.
Look, I'll be honest, right? If I had my time again, I'd probably go into like sneaker fashion or music, definitely. Like, I love sports science, but if I could be in a band, I'd be in a band.
It's never too late, mate.
If I could make trainers.
You got the pay for it.
Yeah. But sports science pays bills.
Yeah, of course.
Ryan, have you got any sort of sum up questions for Lee? Any wrap up ones?
We've talked about trainers, so I'm good, mate.
Signed off. Lee, I thought I'd try a little staple question for you. I've not actually run this by Ryan, but I'd love like a bit of a staple question that we get all guests who are parents to answer, which is quite philosophical in a way. You can have a bit to think about it, but give us your parenting experience so far in 3 words. And you strike me as someone who could probably riff that off.
Just great fun.
Love that. I thought I was going to say just don't do it. I didn't know where that was going.
Parenting experience in 4 words.
Antithesis of Nike, don't do it.
Yeah. Love that, yeah. Just great fun. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, in terms of wrapping up, Lee, have you got any questions for me and Ryan? Anything that you want me and Ryan to do more of or less of?
Definitely do more of this, guys, because I just love the content. I love the fact that not only is it presented in a professional way, which takes a lot of time and effort, guys, so fair play on that, but I think just the broad spread of topics that you're covering, it means there's a little bit for everyone. I've certainly enjoyed watching it myself and listening, so I can't thank you enough, and just honoured to be on, guys.
Mate, thank you.
Who would have thought all those years back this is where we'd be, right?
Honestly, there's nowhere I would have thought even like podcasts they were a thing back then, but we had obviously Davey on and we were talking about how much of a niche they were. Not so much anymore. No, we jumped on too late, mate.
Basically, I always remember bringing my dad in for that level 2 assessment, if I can bring this full circle. And I said to him, Dad, have you ever used a treadmill before? And he went, no. And I'm like, why on earth have you not told me this? I'm like, you stood in a treadmill. He looked terrified, bless him. And I always remember thinking, what is Lee going to think to this? Because my dad looks like a giraffe on this
I don't remember that. You had to bring your dad in for the assessment.
It was like a mock client, essentially.
But they're the best ones, though, because if you brought each other in, you already know what you're doing. There's very little to coach. Like, those are the best ones because you can see that it's real and you can see that you're a great coach.
He's going to have a tough time. Let's pull up a chair for this one.
I was just thinking, I've got a spare hour. Get him on for 40 minutes. Wipe the speed up. Let's see what happens.
I made sure I got an Happy Meal on way home, Lee. Lee, if people want to follow the amazing things that you're doing, if people want to pop on and say hello, where can they find you?
Probably on Instagram. I don't share a lot of content other than pictures of sneakers.
Worth it for that.
But I am genuinely always happy for people to contact me directly on message on there. So it'd be Lee 3ELL. So if anyone wants to chat about anything, always happy to jump on a call or exchange some messages.
Amazing. Lee, thank you very much.
Mate, thank you for today. Awesome. Thank you for coming on.
Cheers, mate.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate
Enjoyed it.
Thank you. Guys, thank you for joining us on the Fitness Podcast. We'll see you next one.
See you soon.
Mega that, mate. Thank you. Really, really good.
Very grateful, mate.
Awesome.